I mean, that's been our thesis from 5 years ago from a white paper, and nothing
Right.
has changed, right? Like the whole point of Akash is to remove the heavy concentration of power. Like compute cloud today is a fabric of modern society. Our data, your data, everything runs in the cloud, and there's no going back, right?
Right.
And the cloud providers are getting increasingly powerful with concentrated compute power. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Alibaba, right? Control about
Right.
80% of the market today. So, and it's especially crazy when it comes to GPUs, right? Because GPUs are so high demand, especially the high ends like H100s and A100s. They selectively choose who they want to give GPUs to. If you're a startup that just raised capital and want to get 10 H100s at $3 an hour, you cannot get them on Amazon or Google. It's
Wow.
impossible. And this is like, go talk to any AI dev and they'll tell you. I get messages on a weekly basis, at least from 2 to 3 AI devs asking for like, I want 5 GPUs or 10 GPUs. They're expensive GPUs, right? So, but they're not
Right.
like millions of dollars, but it's still hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You cannot get them because they don't want, they're, big corporations, big sort of like cloud providers want to extract as much value as possible.
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
Greg, appreciate you joining us. Chuck Schotten, meet Greg Osuri. Chuck and I are working on a project together and has a similar startup background to mine, so I thought he could add some value to the conversation. But for everybody joining us, appreciate you. Thanks for being here. I'm Brad Nickel. I host a show called Mission DeFi and another one we do 3 days a week called DeFi Lunch. We recently had Greg on my Mission DeFi show with an in-depth interview about what Akash is, why it's important, and kind of where they're headed. But I thought, Greg, we could start off with you kind of doing a quick intro of yourself and talking kind of in general terms what Akash is, and then we can get into the impact that Akash will have on the AI and GPU market, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Greg Osuri. I'm the CEO for Overclock Labs and the creators of Akash Network. Akash is the world's first supercloud. What that means is it's a cloud that functions on a heterogeneous device set that's essentially distributed across the globe and really good for leveraging underutilized capacity. And it does so in a decentralized and a permissionless manner. Where anyone with cloud grade compute can contribute to the network, while anyone that can want to use it can use it in a permissionless using a non-custodial key. So it's the world's first open cloud,
and it's been we introduced the concept about 5 years ago, the idea of a super cloud. And we launched the platform about 2 years ago. Now it's a growing set of globally distributed developers building it and using it. We have hundreds of applications running on it. Around 50 odd providers are around the world contributing to this. Today, it's a premium product in the Cosmos ecosystem. Currently, about 30 to 40% of Cosmos projects use Akash in some form or the other. And we're on the cusp of really expanding our use case to machine learning and AI with the introduction of AI supercloud, really introduction of GPU. So happy to get into that and why AI needs a supercloud and how Akash is going to solve the problem.
So essentially what you guys have created, and you have a background in kind of creating marketplaces and recruiting developers to build things around a technology. And this is essentially the ability for developers to come in and create applications that make use of compute, whether it's CPUs or GPUs or whatever, and you provide the ability for them to make use of that, be a part of a marketplace, and be able to make use of resources in applications that they want to deploy, whether it be something as simple as, hey, get a GPU, or something more elaborate and complex that has other kinds of functionality and integrations around it. Is that a pretty quick summary of it?
Correct. Yeah. So we developers today use the cloud as the primary way of delivering applications. I mean, cloud here, I mean, Amazon Web Services and Google or Microsoft, right? And when you use them, you're kind of limited to only, that cloud provider. There's really no way to leverage all the other cloud providers and all the providers. There are about 7 million providers in the world. And a lot of times these are data centers of the world. A lot of times these data centers are heavily underutilized, right? So I think the best estimates put utilization at around 15% or so. So what Akash is doing is essentially taking this heavily underutilized compute and putting them on a marketplace and giving a homogeneous layer on top of that adds very similar experience as deploying in the cloud, but really it's distributed all over, right? So the advantage is enormous cost savings is the first visible advantage. We're talking about in some cases about 85% cheaper, or 80 to 85% cheaper than what you would pay on Amazon, right? So that's the first visible benefit. And second visible benefit, not so obvious, is it's obvious for people that use it, I suppose, it's just access, right? Especially for GPUs and high-end GPUs, where we see quite a lot of protectiveness that happens with cloud providers when it comes to GPUs like H100s or A100s, which are the best GPUs to train machine learning, right? So today, to get H100s, you need to have a minimum, I think, a $3 million commitment in one of the big providers to even get access to them. So Akash is changing that equation by allowing anyone with H100s. Turns out there are a lot of people that just bought them up and just holding on to them because it's very hard to get these chips. So you can get them, you kind of get them. A lot of these people have these chips, mostly machine learning companies, just sitting on idle capacity, and Akash is the secondary market for them to offload some of the capacity while retaining ownership, right? So that's the best part. So you can keep your chips, but you can also have others use your chips.
Love it. And the model is that people can request what they need, and providers can then essentially reverse bid on this, which is also part of what drives the prices down, right, for this compute power that's available.
Correct. It's an open auction. So the way it works is, deployers or tenants, we call them, specify their needs and what they want to deploy and how much they're willing to pay for the deployment. So tenants set the price, right, as a user. You say, I want $10 for this, per hour for a GPU for A100. And you post the request, a buy order essentially on the marketplace. And providers that can fulfill the buy order bid on it. And then, and the buyer essentially selects what provider they want to, because, there's quite a complex set of attributes you can choose from, all the way that, goes across performance and price and a whole lot of variables that you have access to. And then once you're satisfied as a buyer, a lease gets created, where then the deployment happens and the transfer of tokens happens. You pay using this native token called AKT and all the good stuff. And then the blockchain kind of disappears almost. It's just you and the provider in a peer-to-peer manner. You and all the other providers you have, essentially selected to work with. And blockchain is just there to coordinate and ensure the payments are settled and all the good stuff. But for the most part, it's not very, it's not in the middle. It's more of a, more on the sidelines at that point, right? So, yeah. So, and all this happens in, non-custodial way. So there's no sort of
So
like,
Greg, I have a
Yeah.
question. It's probably a couple of questions, but let me just start with a little background. This is Chuck. I've probably put well over 100 different systems in Amazon's cloud in all sorts of different types of deployment models, from dedicated AMIs to containerized stuff to whatever. So I'm trying to map what your anticipated use cases are in the Akash network to what I might traditionally do as a deployer of some enterprise grade application in AWS or Azure or Bluemix, or you pick the current big name cloud provider. Do you view the use cases as potentially long running enterprise grade centralized sites, or are these transient workflows that, hey, I might need to run something on a GPU and get an answer back in an hour or two, or is it some combination of that?
Good question. So it can do both. It can do long running as well as batch optimized workflows, right? So the technology on the underneath the hood really works on it's based on Kubernetes, right? So essentially build a Docker container, and you orchestrate the container and all the services that application needs in this language we created called SDL file, which is very, very similar to Docker Compose. And that file gets, transcribed providers and deployed in Kubernetes clusters. So essentially in the background, the providers are running Kubernetes. So if your application can run in Kubernetes, it should run on Akash.
And so, so that opens up a couple of questions. I know that if I deploy into a cloud provider, we use AWS as an example, that I've got the public-private key pair to talk to that instance, that I can manage all of the virtual devices that are attached to it, whatever the networking, CDN, whatever else I have to put in front of that. And there's some level of trust that Amazon doesn't do anything with the internals of your system that's yours to mess with. What assurance or what mechanism is in place for me to know that whoever's hosting this in your global cloud doesn't have some inappropriate visibility into what's going on in my container, what's going on in local storage, what's going on the network? How do I put something there that I know is going to be trustworthy?
Good question. So Akash is a market, and the trust is as good as the provider that provides it, right? So you get a variety of providers. You get providers like Equinix. In fact, Amazon is going to be a provider very soon. So it's not, you're not moving away from Amazon. You're still able to get access to the Amazon. Akash just makes it really amazing. It's a super cloud, right? It makes it amazing to do multi-cloud operations. So it really comes down to the provider that you're choosing and the attributes the provider advertises in terms of their liveliness, in terms of their security guarantees, compliance, all that stuff is verified using a decentralized set of auditors. So you can choose to trust an auditor, or you can choose to trust a provider, but there's always some amount of trust you require, just like you would do in the real world, right? There's no escape from that, because Akash is a general purpose deployment platform. It's not a smart contract platform. So it works on a much lower level that requires trust. So Akash is minimizing the amount of trust required by giving you the tools that you may not actually get with Amazon's or Google's, like a lot more transparency in terms of and verification of these attributes, in terms of identity, in terms of certifications, all that stuff. So it really puts the user in control as to who they want to trust and how they want to deploy. Of course, if you're doing something that is highly sensitive in nature, you want better guarantees, like probably will choose Equinix's of the world and Amazon's of the world. But if you're doing something that you don't have any private data, something like training an LLM, for example, there's not too much privacy required, but all you're optimizing is for cost and distribution and latency. So then you have a lot more variety. So Akash is think of Akash like an Airbnb instead of, whereas Amazon is like a Hilton, right? You got a lot more variety. Basically that, right? That's the model.
Let's use a practical example that matches what you guys are actually building on yourself. So it's Tendermint based application. Suppose I want to be a blockchain verifier for a Cosmos derived network, and we do that for Canto, for example. So suppose I want to
Sure.
run my Canto validation node on Akash. Is that something that is in the realm of possible? Is it practical? Will I be able to do things like set up a managed cluster of those so that I have failover and all the right stuff? What does that look like from my perspective? Because I completely get the idea that I've got a one-time, one-off job that needs to use a GPU to run an AI solution or something like that. But for a long-running thing that has to have high availability and high degree of trust, is that something that I would be smart to put into this environment, or it would be challenging for me?
Oh, absolutely. You can go to console.akash.network and you can do that right now, right? There are multiple nodes you can deploy. In fact, Akash gives you the multiple ways you look at how you can distribute trust, right? So first is you can go the simple route where you can be like, hey, I want to select an Equinix. I know Equinix is right. Equinix is a direct provider, or OVH or Cherry servers. All these are directly providing compute to Akash, and you know they are trustworthy because they're public organizations, right? So you have similar guarantees with Amazon. Second, you can do is, well, I don't know if I want to trust these people too much. I probably want a more secure architecture where I want to do remote signers. So using something like Postgres or something like a remote signer for deploying a Tendermint node where the transactions are actually being processed on one of these low trust servers, whereas the key signing happens in a high trust environment,
Right.
which is computationally less intensive. But now you have a lot more secure architecture because that's probably the way you should do it anyway. A little complicated, but that's probably, it's way better than what you would normally for all your keys on a single server, right?
Sure.
So Akash gives you that capability and gives you the optionality that you don't normally get with in a single provider. And a lot of that is just practices, right? So, and the second way to look at it is liveliness, right? So you probably should be optimizing for, like if its node goes down, you probably want load balancing. And a lot of times we don't really focus too much on liveliness when we deploy on the cloud because there's some sort of like expectation the cloud is going to be on all the time. And that's not very true. Akash forces you to be a lot more redundant and deploy your workloads in a manner that can recover quickly and have high fault tolerance across data centers, right? So Akash is one of those like very powerful tools. When you know how to use the tool, you can have a lot of like advantages. But if you're, not an advanced developer or probably looking for something easier, Akash may not be the best tool because, it's not the best tool to do simple things, but great for doing complex things. Just put it that way.
So let me turn the question around now. I'm somebody who's got a rack full of spare equipment. I want to monetize it using Akash, and I want to do that in a way that is both respectful of the applications that I need to run, as well as perhaps whatever concern I have for privacy or security, or even perhaps the legality of the things that are being done on my network. So I put a box in the network. I'm participating in the Akash swarm, and somebody wants to run an application on my platform. Do I have any visibility into what they're doing? What's my liability if they're doing something that's not necessarily legal in the jurisdiction that I have my hosting in? How does that work in this environment?
Very good question. So, Akash is permissionless and censorship resistant. So Akash protocol doesn't censor any users or censor any application that could potentially have, a situation where someone is, deploying something fully illegal, right? In a scenario like that, the provider is ultimately liable, right? Whoever owns the IP address is ultimately liable. So, so providers are required to take down the workloads if they see their workload to be inappropriate, right? And there's actually a project under Akash community called moderation, where the providers the proposal on how do you actually do this, do this sort of like monitoring, and every provider does that. Amazon does that, Google does it.
Sure.
Every provider by law is required to do that stuff, right? So we're making it easy for providers to be compliant, right? Now, what it really looks like in real life, right? So if the content is something that has a political bias, or that's there may not be something people like, but there could be a group of people that really like the content, like Parliament, for example, right? If it goes on Akash, as long as a single provider is willing to host Parler, which is not illegal, by the way, it's just, some people may disagree with what Parler stands for and whatnot, right?
Sure.
As long as the provider is willing to host Parler, the Parler will run Akash, right? The moment, but for something like child pornography, which is universally frowned upon, if, again, as long as the provider is willing to host child pornography, which I'll be surprised there will be, that thing will run. But providers will self-select and providers will self-moderate. And if they don't comply with and still keep hosting really bad things, I mean, the law will be after them, right? So
what
what
mechanisms are in place for me as a provider to know what's actually going on? I mean, I don't want to spy on my customers any more than Amazon does. I know they do scans of things like S3 buckets to make sure that there's no pirate content in there. And if they get a request from a law enforcement organization or other regulatory body that says, hey, what's going on here is not good, they are obligated to shut it down.
Yeah.
But in a completely generic scenario, somebody loads up a Docker image that's nothing but an Ubuntu shell prompt, and then they log in there and install a bunch of stuff that wasn't related to the image. I don't know that it's in there. I haven't seen the package commands that they've installed, and all of a sudden they're running a website out of there over a VPN connection, which I have no visibility into. That's Silk Road 2, right? I'm not sure, I mean, I guess at that point you probably have plausible deniability, but I'm just concerned from a provider standpoint. How can I make sure that I'm not inadvertently doing the stuff without intruding unnecessarily into the application? Is that
right?
Do you have policies about that, or how does that work?
I mean, it's not a policy, it's more of a tools available for providers, right? There are tools now being developed that will actively scan a website hosted on your network, look for malicious content, and most of these tools are looking for really bad content like child pornography and things of that nature. I don't think they do any other type of content unless that's up to the provider if they want to develop. And this project is actually open. It's in one of our in a community repo called moderation or working group moderation. There's a proposal as to how to solve it. This is a universal problem, not only us. RV, Live here.
Of course. And I was just hoping that you had some magic silver bullet that nobody else has figured out yet. I mean, other than labor and sweat and effort.
This is so important. I'll tell you how this thing works. I have some experience with this, right? This is so important. If you do not address this, Web3 and DeFi will go down. And it's what exactly happened with Sia Coin. You remember Sia or Sia?
Yeah.
SC, right? They're one of the first storage networks. They were very, very like, oh, we're not going to take down, we're not going to help any of our, node providers be compliant. And they got, first of all, even before the police comes, right? They got shut down by the ISP layer. Like Google, for example, if you email a link to Sia in Gmail, it will not deliver the email. All the messengers will not function. All the infrastructure that you and I use will stop working. And then the police comes, right? And then the protocol gets harassed, yada yada yada. It's really, really bad if you don't be proactive about these things, right? And RVF has done a smart job with actually being proactive in developing tools. There are a lot of public databases, and I had a lot of conversations with law enforcement, with folks that are working in Secret Service, with FBI, a lot of those folks, right? It's a real concern. And there are actual tools that everybody wants to help, right? It's not something like, it's a universal problem, be it centralized or decentralized. There's just bad people trying to do bad things. And so there are a lot of databases now that we're trying to make it work in a decentralized manner that can take a signature.
Gone away again.
Can't hear you, Greg. All right. We'll wait for Greg to join us again. So, one of the things I wanted to I do want to talk to him about, because obviously AI is exploding. You'd have to be unconscious not to see that it's happening. And one of the things we wanted to talk about is the overall impact of kind of AI growth and the need for GPUs within the Akash network. And I think one of the things that this brings to the table for folks is, I was having a discussion earlier today with a friend of mine, Alejandro, and his concern with regards to AI is that the power of AI, the control over it, becomes kind of this centralized and concentrated power. And I'm encouraged, because I see so much of this being open sourced in terms of the models and other components of this, that I'm actually pretty excited that the fact that so much of this is being released. Yesterday, Salesforce actually released a coding model that performs better than any of the other models in generating code, and they completely released it open source. And so I think what it means is that at the end of the day, it's in their best interest to have other people utilizing these models and improving them, because it'll make it a better tool for their business and for how they integrate AI into it. And one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about was, it seems to me that Akash, while the compute itself isn't going to be obviously on the blockchain, it provides kind of a decentralized access to the compute power, and will allow kind of the lower costs to make this open source capability, make it possible for open source or not as well-funded projects to actually begin doing more research and testing and releasing more products and advancing the space. So I'm actually really excited about that. And I think Akash probably has a strong role in that. So
I wanted to know if you're participating in this network. Hey, I've got a rack full of GPUs, and it's been great fun being providers to all you guys hosting these AIs, but I got to take my toys and go home. How do you get out? Because once you have customers on your node, it's not like you can just pull the rug out from under them. That's an interesting.
I would expect there are time limits. You're booking a contract for a period of time, and then they can't get out, right? So but I don't know. I guess that's a good question.
I mean,
other thing,
I think his model of it being like Airbnb is right. You've got a contractual period that you're signed up for, it probably renews and whatnot. But
right,
you could have scenarios where you have a hardware failure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Greg.
I don't know how.
So
I noticed my thing went on mute, but I can't remember how much you heard. But I don't know.
the last, you were gone. So if you had more you wanted to say about that, go ahead.
I don't know where I stopped, but did you talk about KYCC?
Right.
Credit card based KYC at some point, right? So I think the world is kind of going to high protectionism when it comes to GPUs. GPUs right now there's export control on high-end GPUs. You cannot sell GPUs to Chinese users, especially the high-end ones. 9 months ago, Biden did a EO banning all GPU sales. So I would imagine some American GPU providers will be like, have to know who the users are. So I don't think there's escape from like verified user, but that we'll let the future deal with it. But at this point, Akash, at a protocol level, will always be censorship resistant and always be permissionless, right? That's not going to change ever.
That's awesome. One of the things we were talking about while you were gone was, I was in a conversation with a friend of mine, Alejandro, earlier today on Twitter, and we're talking about, AI doomers and people who are really concerned and worried about it and all of that. And he said his concern wasn't in the kind of typical things. His concern was kind of centralization and concentration of power around AI. And kind of my response to that was that I'm really encouraged by the amount of things that are being open sourced by companies like Meta. Yesterday, Salesforce released a coding model that performs better than any of the other models that are available to be used. They open sourced it. And my point on that was that I think that what's going to happen is these businesses will realize that actually open sourcing this will actually improve their models if they're using them for specific verticals or specific markets. My other point, though, was that I also think that while the compute itself we can't put GPUs on a blockchain, we can, through a project like this, actually have even more kind of decentralization and control of the GPUs. Do you kind of see that as kind of part of the model for you, is that your role can be to actually make this more accessible for researchers, make it more accessible for startups, and also kind of decentralize the access to this power?
I mean, that's been our thesis from 5 years ago from a white paper, and nothing
Right.
has changed, right? Like the whole point of Akash is to remove the heavy concentration of power. Like compute cloud today is a fabric of modern society. Our data, your data, everything runs in the cloud, and there's no going back, right?
Right.
And the cloud providers are getting increasingly powerful with concentrated compute power. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Alibaba, right? Control about 80% of the market today. And it's especially crazy when it comes to GPUs, right? Because GPUs are so high demand, especially the high ends like H100s and A100s. They selectively choose who they want to give GPUs to. If you're a startup that just raised capital and want to get 10 H100s at $3 an hour, you cannot get them on Amazon or Google. It's impossible. And this is like, go talk to any AI dev and they'll tell you. I get messages on a weekly basis, at least from 2 to 3 AI devs asking for like, I want 5 GPUs or 10 GPUs. They're expensive GPUs, right? So, but they're not like millions of dollars, but it's still hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You cannot get them because they don't want, they're, big corporations, big sort of like cloud providers want to extract as much value as possible. They rather go with, big purchases. So the accounts teams are set up that way, working enterprise, you know what that means, right? How that looks like.
Right.
So they don't want to sell it to like smaller, startups. And the second problem we see is even companies, so a lot of the smaller like companies, what they end up doing is they get into this heavy pre-committed contract with Google just to get access to these GPUs, and they don't end up fulfilling the contract. So there's a secondary problem of like, okay, I want these GPUs. I don't know if I can get them or not. I'll get in a contract with you. That way I have guarantees, but now I can't. I'm not using them. I have nowhere to go. So I'm like, I'm like spending a lot of money. So Akash is like taking all those structural problems and like using these inefficiencies to create a marketplace so that the power is a lot more distributed. And I predict GPUs are the new oil. Whoever has GPUs wins the world, the AI race.
Yeah.
Ultimately, right? OpenAI is better than the rest of the LLMs, arguably so, is because it has access to GPU. And Google and companies like that are the only ones that compete because they have access to GPU. Models are open source. Right? The data, for the most part, is open. Right? So,
well, there's an interesting thing that you might want to try to figure out how to engage, which is the whole rise of web GPU. The ability for a simple web page to access the GPU on a local browser-based machine could really open up the ability to provide transient compute, with distributed GPUs. My concern as a provider in this network, and I was talking to Brad about this while you were offline, is suppose I need to repurpose those GPUs. I want to use them for my own project. I need to take them offline. What happens? How does it work for a provider to be able to reclaim or decommission or fix hardware outages with
good question. So there's always a provider always need to reclaim the resources, right? Be it Amazon, be it Google. It's just the reclamation time varies between providers. Some go years, some go months, some go hours. So there's a parameter on Akash for providers to set the reclamation time, pre-committed reclamation time, and that is communicated to the tenant. The tenant is expected to configure your workload, to conform to the reclamation time. So if you're running an LLM that requires minimum 6-month warranty and minimum 6-month reclamation, the provider should advertise that for you, right? Beyond that point, there's no guarantee. So configurable reclamation is what Akash is offering.
Is there any possibility or anybody working on this, and it may not be technically possible, of aggregating GPU power so that if a provider fell out, it could be aggregated for use?
Yeah, there's a company we're working with. Can't recall the name, but that's doing GPUs over IP. So they are essentially giving you can run a CUDA workload on this like IP-based GPU and have similar experience in terms of development as you're working on a single GPU, but it's actually distributing over IP. Of course, there's latency concerns. They're doing some crazy work, but yes, that's one of the projects that we're working with to aggregate GPU power.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that would be a huge solution to the overall problem, and it makes it flexible for providers to come in and out as long as they're aggregating it. So from your perspective and kind of looking forward for the GPU market, do you see kind of, I mean, look, everyone is piling in, every VC in the world is piling in, and everybody and their dog has an AI startup now. Do you foresee a point where kind of inventory is going to ebb and flow downward and you're going to have a little difficulty because they'll start being utilized? Or do you really see that so many people are buying these up and stockpiling these GPUs that there's going to be a pretty good flow of continuous availability for what Akash can make available?
So supply is not catching up to demand, not even close. I mean,
Okay.
So if you really look back in the supply chain for GPUs, so the first touch point is NVIDIA, which makes the best GPUs for AI. They're the only company that makes high on-chip memory, and that's what you need to train neural networks, right? So, and they depend on a company called TSMC, or Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, which supplies about 65%+ of semiconductors in the world. They're based in China, Taiwan, sorry. So the TSMC again depends on another company called ASML, which makes the machines to make these chips called the fabs, right? And this entire supply chain is so heavily constrained, especially during COVID, that they cannot make chips fast enough to meet all the demand the VCs are putting on the market. There's so much investment happening right now in AI, and every company, large to small, needs to have an AI first strategy, right? There's so much demand, and right now cloud providers are the supposed distributors for this compute, and it's starting to break down. If you try to get A100 right now on the cloud, it's impossible. I mean, try it. Right?
Wow.
Go try it. Like, it's impossible. A100 80 gigs, H100s, don't even think about it, but A100 80 gigs are impossible. You may be lucky to get A100 40 gigs, which is okay. It's not the best GPU, right? So, and that's going to be the case, that's going to be the case. We don't see that changing anytime soon because of a few factors. The one big factor is the reverse globalization. TSMC is a strategic asset for the West that China is basically getting aggressive and and in all these like aggressive.
Just as an aside, Berkshire Hathaway unloaded all of their TSMC stock yesterday because they don't think it's going to make it through the China thing.
Okay, well, so sure. I don't know about geopolitical predictions, but I do know that TSMC is such a valuable asset that U.S. and the West is trying to protect to a point.
Sure.
They invested about $50 billion, I think Biden gave, to have a fab in Arizona, right?
Yep.
Or somewhere in the U.S. That's going to increase the cost by 5x.
Right.
It's not going to make it any cheaper because America's production is much more higher than in Taiwanese production because, well, there's cost of labor, but also like time of labor. Americans don't work as long as Taiwanese work in general, right? So a lot of these like factors they're going in, and then there's chip shortage, right? So it's just going to create, and then there's supply chain shortage, and then the demand is exponentially growing. So there's no indicator that indicates the cost and supply is going to increase over the next 5 years. And even if they do, Akash is going to be the secondary market. So it doesn't matter, if there's supply, you're still going to need, you're still going to have a market for people that have these chips and they're not using them. And, if you're saying the world is going to use all the chips all the time, I don't think that's the reality. You're going to have chips that are just sitting idle all the way from data centers to even home computers. Now we have, gaming machines and all these amazing machines with very powerful GPUs that are just sitting there idle. And I don't, I use my Xbox maybe once or twice a year. I'm just sitting there most of the time with, just collecting dust. Why is that GPU not connected? Right. So a lot of powerful GPUs, and I think with AI, GPUs are going to come more and more in the home. I think we're going to see home supercomputers that are going to be local, because they need latency, right? Going to be like
Right.
analyzing, sensing, and inferring data and training the data for your home operations in your home. They're not going to go to the cloud. Right? So you're always going to have a lot of unused capacity, a lot of distributed capacity, and that's the future we're going to have. And the only way to make that more efficient is to share, because there's just not going to be enough resources. Right? Like, for example, you say, consider a scenario where you have a supercomputer in your house, and your neighbor has one, and you need more power. Right? You don't want to go to the cloud. You can go ask your neighbor and can use Akash for that to trade, right? And vice versa. So Akash becomes like this battery pack for GPUs at some point, right? Just use it when you have, or sell it back to the grid when you have excess, or get it back from the grid when you need it, right? So that's the kind of future that we're looking at. And
That's
it's
amazing.
only possible for a decentralized system, because centralized systems will absolutely fail. There's no way at the scale which we're talking about, a centralized system can function well, and it has to be decentralized from the get-go. It's not like, oh, we're going to eventually decentralize or not. It has to be from the get-go. The code has to be decentralized, and that's where Akash is.
That's cool. Do you envision, or do you know of folks who are starting to think about kind of building around the Akash ecosystem, AI tools and applications that they will deploy that are exclusively kind of using what you guys make available and using the platform itself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot. So there's a whole new category of protocols called DML, or decentralized machine learning protocols. Now there are stacking up. First thing that comes into my mind is BitTensor, which is beautiful, protocol that's trying to decentralize the human element of trading, right? LLMs,
Right.
there are two elements. There's computing and there's human reinforcement training. The human reinforcement makes the trading data much better in terms of quality, right? So
Right.
they incentivize the human layer, and for them, they're not going to go to Amazon for GPU. I mean, they can't even get it to go, right? So
Right.
it's like, for them, they need to have an end-to-end interoperable stack. Akash is the best way. Look at Fetch AI, for example. Fetch AI does automation. They like AutoGPT for that decentralized. They're agent-based automation framework. They're built on Cosmos. For them, they need GPUs. They're not going to go to Amazon, right? So there's a whole like decentralized machine learning stack that's forming up, that is leveraging Akash, or wants to leverage Akash to exclusively for the GPU power. And then you have the other models like Jensen. Even, I guess we had a conversation with Together Compute as well. So a lot of these are higher level functions that do some, they either do machine learning or fine tuning or inference to some degree. All of them are, want access to a decentralized, a GPU network, and Akash is the only one that can provide that. We also saw some new protocols like drug design on in a decentralized way. Yeah, we've seen quite a lot of like new things pop up. I mean, of course, we have a new hackathon coming up very soon for all these ideas to use GPUs on Akash.
Nice.
And we'll be announcing the date very soon. So you're going to see quite a lot of applications now. And there's also a new class that can leverage low-end GPUs instead of H100s for training. Jensen is really a company that's working really, really amazingly well to achieve this. So, they're looking at using Akash exclusively to source the GPUs.
That's awesome. Well, and I think that the potential is just tremendous. And I could see, funding mechanisms being built around this from DAOs and organizations and groups within the system. The bottom line is, it seems to me that the way you guys have architected this opens the door to an entire network of functionality and development and compute that it's going to be really interesting, because I think what it ultimately can end up being is driving kind of some of the mainstream folks more in this direction, which at the end of the day also doesn't hurt the whole case for blockchain and crypto and decentralization. So I think this is a great lead in for the overall model. It's great. Wanted to check and see.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah, now I can. Go ahead, Greg. Yep.
I'm so sorry. Mobile is the worst possible device for like doing live streams.
I don't understand why Twitter still doesn't have this on desktop, but whatever.
It's horrible. I got a phone call and things stop, like great.
Of course.
80% of the requests we get is from non-decentralized, applications. Right. Most of them are like
nice.
YC funded startups that don't have too much money to come into a $3 million deal, but have like enough money to pay for compute and train, right? So I think that's where we start. And we also got requests from like people that want 250 GPUs, A100s, and things of that nature, right? And we're not, we're not optimizing for that sort of like heavy machine learning for 6 months cases yet, because we want our users to be innovators and smaller companies that really can't really get GPUs, right? And these are not cheap. They're like paying $3 to $4 an hour, right? Like for a GPU.
Right.
So most of our users are young entrepreneurs and like just funded companies, mostly wise companies. And we also have a second set of people that we call it the base AI, right? The whole whole new set of entrepreneurs that are afraid if the AI has a lot of biases, and biases really depends on LLMs, right? Depends on who trains them. The human element, remember? The human element also is part of training. So if you look at OpenAI, it's going to be heavily biased on people that train them. Turns out a lot of the OpenAI employees are based in San Francisco. Right. So that's why it's important to distribute that human element to the globe. And that's why I think decentralization plays a very key role. And a lot of the folks are afraid if the training data it doesn't have the same biases as Amazon's of the world, you may get canceled. So there's a whole new decentralized and like unbiased sort of like protocols that I'm looking into Akash, because Akash takes a very strong position on neutrality. Right. So yeah. So I mean, yeah. So I'm super excited.
I am excited for the project as well. I think it's exciting that it can drive more interest and engagement for people to see kind of the utility and availability and possibilities with blockchain and decentralization and permissionlessness. I think all of those things are fantastic, and I think it's these kinds of applications and the applications that are going to spur off of Akash that make it kind of more acceptable to the real world that's not here in our world yet. So I think that's fantastic. Before we wrap up, Greg, I just want to make sure that nobody in the audience has any questions. I don't have any raised hands, but I just wanted to check and see. And then if you want to kind of just wrap up and kind of let us know if there's anything else we should know about what's coming from Akash or what you guys are working on that we haven't hit on today.
Yeah, so lots happening with Akash in the next 3 months. I think it's going to be our biggest quarter ever. Of course, GPUs are the main things. We have GPUs in testnet now, but we are launching an incentivized testnet in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for it. So you will be able to earn AKT by providing GPUs to Akash network to help it test. So the goal is to stress test the system as much as possible, and so we invite you to break the system. So if you break, there's a big reward.
Nice.
So if you're someone that wants to hack, that wants to break the system, that loves chaos secretly, please participate in our testnet. And soon after that, we're also going to we're also going to introduce stable payments. It's been a big challenge for Akash. Yes, we're going to do USDC payments for Akash. It's been a big challenge for Akash users because AKT is volatile, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on who you are and depending on the AKT price. So that wasn't a very desirable experience for a lot of our users. And with stable payments, to be able to pay using USDC. Furthermore, we're going to do credit cards as well, with non-custodial, capability as first, but as an optionally, you'll be able to pay using credit cards. And it's very important for mainstream users to be able to do that. A big challenge I've noticed with Akash is when you go and talk to AI devs that don't interact with crypto, have no idea what it is. They usually, when you ask them to go download a browser wallet, give a mother's passport and track and get this. It's just very undesirable experiences, and credit cards are going to fix that. So it's very important as we graduate from non-custodial only option to optionally paying using credit card. I think it's going to be a big deal. So in the hackathon, we're throwing in probably 4 weeks to invite a lot of AI devs onto Akash and go mainnet, and soon after this hackathon. There's a lot happening with GPUs. So if you're an AI dev, you want GPUs, please come talk to me. Or if you are a provider that has GPUs, please come talk to me as well. We'll also be introducing provider incentives. So you'll be, Akash is pre-incentive. Akash, so far, the adoption has been purely organic. We did not incentivize anybody to deploy an Akash or provide computer Akash. Everything has been purely organic. But now we'll have incentives because we know the kind of supply we need to attract, which is a high-end GPU. So if you're, Akash is about introducing incentives. So if you want to get a leg up, please join our community. Akash net _ is the Akash Network Twitter, and my Twitter is Greg Osuri. Hit us up in either of these accounts, and we'll respond very, very quickly.
Great. Greg, that's really exciting. I can't wait to see what comes out of that hackathon. I love a good hackathon, so I can't wait to see what you guys, what folks come in to create. And I think one of the most appealing things to this whole situation, besides kind of the decentralization and the permissionlessness of it, is you guys have built the system so that it just opens the door to so many different things to be created. So I'm really looking forward to seeing kind of how things progress over the next months and years as this grows. And for me, it's kind of one of the most promising projects to introduce what we're doing to the world, but also to really solve a significant problem out of the gate. So thanks so much for coming on. Chuck, you have anything else? Are you good?
No, it's great to understand more about what's going on. I'm going to go sign up this afternoon.
Excellent.
Yeah, go ahead and
Excellent.
try it yourself, Chuck. Console.Akash Network is where you can go get to try it.
Thanks. Everybody that's listening, I'm going to put this in our podcast feed. You can go to subscribe at missiondefi.com. You can join our community at t.me/missiondefi. We have an AI channel there as well. So we'd love to have you all join us and be a part of the community. We do interviews like this and 3 times a week lunch show. So for those of you that joined late, feel free to visit missiondefi.com to learn more. Greg, thanks so much for your time. Excited for you guys, and we'll have to get you back on in a few months and see how things are going.
Thank you so much, Brad and Chuck. Thanks,
Chuck. Take care, guys.